Hey guys, what's going on? It's Harry Pedigo. How you guys feeling? Look how pretty it is out here. There's my little garden. We got some trees blooming over here. I wish the sun would shine a little bit. It's a little bit cloudy out, but you know, it's just nice to be outside, man. I hope you guys are having a beautiful morning. Listen, today we're talking about some more developments in U.S. foreign policy, man. We're talking today specifically about pages 707 through 709, which is going to kind of wrap up what we've been talking about for the past week and a day about, how the United States really develops as a world power, maybe even a little bit imperialistic in a way, and really changes their foreign policy over the years, right? Okay, so today we're talking about the U.S. policy towards Latin America. And you guys have a lot of reading to do here. It's some big, giant, paragraphs that can be overwhelming. But when you're looking at 707, it's all it's doing, man. It's talking about how has U.S. policy changed. And this is another milestone. We talked about U.S. intervention in Cuba being a milestone, U.S. intervention in Panama being a milestone. And then now we're kind of spreading even further down south to South America. So the big thing to take away from this, guys, is a kind of a foreign policy that the textbook refers to as the Roosevelt Corollary. So what does that mean, man? What are we talking about? How is this a change? Why do we have a new term now? We were talking about, the Monroe Doctrine in the past, in that, we talked about how Washington felt about being like an isolationist in America, staying out of, foreign affairs of other nations, just focusing on the development of the U.S. But Roosevelt, as we saw in his interaction, the way he handled the development of the Panama Canal, we see that the U.S. is really getting involved in foreign politics, right? Intervening in small countries. So the Roosevelt Corollary is kind of an idea that the United States is sort of a police force, an international police force. They're kind of policing wrongdoing. If they see something happening in the world that, kind of goes against the core principles of what it is to be an American, such as, communism, socialism, anything that's not democracy driven, they're like, we gotta solve that. Or if they see any kind of injustice. So Roosevelt really takes on a whole new, level of, intervening in other nations. He's acting like an international police force. And there's a cool cartoon there on 707. You see Roosevelt, a giant version of Roosevelt with a big giant stick, carrying these little boats around. You're like, what's going on here, man? What's that mean? Well, there's a cool quote by Roosevelt that I think is in the textbook somewhere here, but he talks about how the U.S., is carrying a big stick. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means, the U.S. is really gaining a lot of power at this point, a lot of influence. And that big stick thing is kind of like if you saw somebody, with a baseball bat, you wouldn't be inclined to mess with them, so to speak, right? And that's how the U.S. is sort of acting in its foreign policy. So check this out. On 708, we talk about another kind of foreign policy that developed after Roosevelt. It's dollar diplomacy. And this is something that President Taft, William Howard Taft, kind of develops, and it kind of is a continuation of what Roosevelt was doing. Roosevelt was policing wrongdoing. He was intervening in Cuba, or intervening in Panama and these other foreign areas for the benefit of America ultimately. And then, Taft says, well, how can we kind of intervene in politics but not do it like in a aggressive or overtly fire and flame guns and, threat and power and stuff like that. And he says, man, what we should do is we should kind of have a stake in foreign countries, especially in South America, by kind of controlling them financially. And this is all about how, William Howard Taft, goes about, bailing out essentially countries who were indebted in South America to European nations. And why would he do that, gang? Well, he would do that because he doesn't want, America doesn't want European nations having control of countries in South America. he doesn't want that, because it's the same thing with the Cuban situation. We didn't want to have a foreign nation controlling Cuba, because that's close to the United States. That could be a risk for us. And the same thing happens with this dollar diplomacy. He says, you know what? I'll pay off your debt to these European countries so they don't have a grip on you anymore. But then that's ultimately going to let us have a grip on those nations in South America and really control things, kind of master of puppets behind the scene through economics and not warfare, not intervening in revolutions like we did in Cuba and Panama, but controlling things through finances, controlling these, trying to make sure that there's no foreign nations who are assisting or have a control on these countries that are very close to us. We want to have a grip on that. So I hope that kind of helps you guys, picture that this is all about foreign policy. And it's really important for us to understand where our foreign policy came from and how it's changed over the years, so we can better understand what's happening in our world today, man. How do we interact, with other nations now? That's something to think about. I hope this isn't too windy, man. But yeah, how do we interact with foreign nations now? I mean, how has our foreign policy changed? Well, of course, talk about that in the textbook, but think about that as you're reading this, man. So, Taft's dollar diplomacy. Think about that. Think about how that changes from the Roosevelt era to Taft. Think about how the foreign policy is continuing to evolve. Love you guys very much. You guys be safe, man. Get outside. Be healthy. Stay active. I'll talk to you soon.